everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from Gillette Stadium, gearing up for the Eagles' second preseason game against the New England Patriots. EJ, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Olivia. We're in lobster roll country, clam chowder country. There's not a whole lot to complain about when you're up here. I find even, we beat the weather getting into the press box, so it's all good on my end. I'm excited for the game, excited for the show.
I would say half of my bloodstream right now is just lobster meat. So I'm also in a pretty good mood myself. Hopefully you're all in a good mood wherever you are watching from. We can continue to keep this conversation going all night long. If you head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day, leave us a comment, a thought throughout the game. EJ is going to be in there and he's going to be answering and engaging with all of you. Also, if you have any thoughts right now, any questions, feel free to leave them down in the YouTube chat, in the Facebook chat, and we will do our best to get to as many of those as we possibly can. All right, let's get into some of the latest news and developments in the Eagles world this week. We are currently, as you all know, we are in New England. The Eagles have been here for about this past week. They are coming off of joint practice against the Patriots on Tuesday, in which the starters got the biggest workload of the training camp slate that they're going to get all preseason long, most likely. That being said, EJ, when you think about the fact that the offensive starters did not play last week against the Baltimore Ravens for the most part on offense, defense, they got to play for a series. Looking ahead to today's game, when you take into account the fact that they practiced this week and that the weather isn't so great, what do you think? Do you think that they'll play any today?
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, especially the offensive guys. Usually, not only in Nick Sirianni's tenure with the team, but I feel like NFL teams in general don't typically play their starters after joint practices. The rationale being that your starters get a lot of work in the joint practices. Coaches always talk about it's a controlled environment where they can script the plays and get the looks they want for their guys. So even if, nothing else was at play here, I don't think the Eagles starters would have played. I think it's important to add as we look out from the press box that it's been, kind of varying between a torrential downpour and a steady rain shower. We've had lightning and thunder here. So, I mean, there's not even players warming up on the field right now, I think probably because of lightning being in the vicinity. So I think that this is probably going to be an ugly game. Obviously Nick Sirianni last week said that the offensive starters are kind of, touch and go, and he decided not to play his offensive starters because of the rain. That was like theoretical rain in Baltimore. It actually didn't really, the storm that was kind of in the area never really kind of formulated. But we're looking at real actual rain right now. So I really don't think we're going to see starters. I actually think it might bring into play some very revealing things about who they really do value, who kind of doesn't need to be fighting for a roster spot, because I think that they might even hold back some guys who maybe were planning on playing, but otherwise, again, this weather is at a point where I think they're going to be cautious.
Let's talk about some of the players that we have been seeing kind of coming back from injuries. I think a big one this week is Cooper DeJean. He has been out all preseason training camp dealing with a hamstring injury. He finally returned to practice on Tuesday. And he only participated in a limited capacity. We saw him participate in individual drills, no team drills yet. When he spoke after practice, he said that he is hopeful to return in advance of next week's game against the Minnesota Vikings, the Eagles' lone preseason game at home. When you think about how this cornerback's depth chart has kind of shaken out in the meantime, I think DeJean early on, just before camp started, before we knew about the injury, it seemed like he was going to be the front runner in the slot position come week one to start. Now, he's fallen behind because he has been injured. Quinyon Mitchell has been taking a number of the starting reps at slot cornerback. With DeJean returning, what chances do you think he has of carving out a role for himself somewhere on this roster come week one?
Yeah, week one is going to be tricky for him. I mean, he missed a lot of time, and we've seen Quinyon Mitchell, as you mentioned, kind of make inroads to that slot cornerback spot. I think if DeJean was healthy going into training camp, there's a good chance that we wouldn't have seen Quinyon Mitchell getting so many reps in the slot right away. I think that curiosity was sort of born out of necessity. I think Vic Fangio sort of alluded to that when we talked to him last week, talking about how it would be more ideal for Quinyon Mitchell to be playing on the outside. They kind of need him to learn how to play inside for the potential of getting their best three cornerbacks out there. So I definitely think that there's something to say about that. As far as where Cooper DeJean fits when he gets back, I think he will get reps at, out of both inside and outside cornerback spots. I'm really intrigued to see if he plays safety. I think that if you just look at it from a logical perspective, if they think he can handle it, as far as, they keep talking about not wanting to throw a lot at the rookies, not putting too much on their plates, although their actions may speak louder than words there. I think Quinyon Mitchell learning two different positions and Cooper DeJean playing across the formation, you kind of see that they think that those guys can handle it. I mean, they have a need at, their depth at safety is thin. So I think that he could factor in there just from a talent perspective, just from, the fact that he can do it. I think if they feel like he can handle it, I think we will see him there too. But I think at the very least, we're going to see him play both inside and outside corner. But yeah, I think his pathway is a lot easier to getting on the field at the slot. Week one, like I said, I think that's going to be hard for him, given how much time he missed, especially I think Quinyon Mitchell probably is maybe penciled in as that week one starter. But I do think Cooper DeJean's going to figure into the secondary because of the versatility he has.
You mentioned, EJ, the depth issues that the Eagles have at safety right now. At the top, CJ Gardner-Johnson has been sidelined with a shoulder injury. He continues to be sidelined. We'll see exactly when he returns and what his exact timeline is. So obviously, with the starters not playing, with him injured, we're not expecting to see him. We also have seen Paris Campbell. He's been sidelined with a groin injury. He returned to practice on Tuesday, also in a limited capacity. Campbell's an interesting one because the Eagles' competition right now for the third receiver role is intriguing. There's a lot of candidates there. Campbell, going into this camp, I think in our minds could have been a front runner for that job, or at least to participate in that rotation. We don't know when Campbell is going to return. We don't know exactly how far along he is in his progress. That being said, if and when he does come back, potentially in the upcoming week, we'll see. Do you think he still has a shot at finding a role for himself on this roster?
I do think he has a shot still. To quote our esteemed colleagues Zach Berman and Bo Wolf, who I listen to on a regular basis, you can't make the club from the tub. It's an expression you hear from them. So I definitely think he's going to have an uphill battle. But listen, I think that with Campbell, Ross, even Johnny Wilson, I think, and Britton Covey, I should add him in there too. The Eagles have a lot of guys that I think are good fourth and fifth receiving options. But if you're asking me, does Paris Campbell still have a chance of really, cementing himself as the third wide receiver? I don't think so. I think that what we've seen throughout training camp is that the offense still runs heavily through A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I think, if you're looking for that third option that can still affect the defense, I think, the Eagles might say that you do it by committee. You might do it with John Ross's speed on some plays. We saw Britton Covey in motion a lot. I think you might see, the threat of him with the ball in his hands. And obviously Paris Campbell can also do some of that deep threat, has some of that deep threat ability, that can affect the defense. But again, I think if those guys are your bottom of the depth chart guys, you feel good about that. So yeah, I think that Paris Campbell can still factor into that role. But yeah, the wide receiver 3 competition that Howie Roseman said they were going to be watching closely throughout training camp. I mean, if they're watching it as closely as we are, which I'm sure they are, I do think that third spot is still something that, they need to be able to figure it out at some point in the next couple of weeks here. I think they'll have opportunities to do so.
Right. This time last week, EJ, we had this whole discussion about potentially wide receiver 3 isn't even on the Eagles roster right now. Do you still feel that
mystery
way?
Man? Yeah. Yeah. I'm still team mystery man. I think that it's funny because it's I feel like a lot of rosters across the NFL do have receivers, a surplus of receivers that would be better than what the Eagles have in terms of, the group outside of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I think that there will be players that make sense in that role available, once it's cut down day, leading into week one. It's just a situation they find themselves in where I think they probably wanted somebody to separate themselves, and it just hasn't really happened. I mean, the joint practice was the most apparent I think it has been all summer, which is important because it was the most important practice. We saw Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, again, heavily featured. The offense looks a lot different, but the end result is really about the same in terms of it running through those two guys in the passing game.
Well, we've talked about the receivers and the competition that is ongoing quite extensively. Let's continue to talk about some of the positional battles that have been shaking out really all training camp long. Continuing this week, cornerback, of course, remains one of the most intriguing positional battles. But that being said, it seems like we're starting to see a front runner start to pull away for that outside job opposite Darius Slay. Isaiah Rodgers has really been commanding a lot of those first team reps. Keely Ringo continues to mix in there. However, it's certainly been a lot more of Rodgers in that spot. What do you make of the competition as it currently stands? And do you think that it's a wrap at this point?
Yeah, it's really an interesting competition because, since the last time we did a show, we talked to Vic Fangio about Quinyon Mitchell's, the slot experiment, let's call it. He didn't play there in college. And I remember I asked Howie Rosen about Quinyon's, versatility right after the draft. And he said that they wanted to make sure that they didn't overload him and put too much on his plate. So it's definitely been a change that he's been playing so much in the slot. But, we asked Vic Fangio about it. He said it would be ideal for him to only be at one spot. But the fact that he's playing, like I mentioned earlier, he's playing in the slot because it might give them a chance to get their best three cornerbacks out there. Now, what that makes you wonder is like, well, what is the best three? As you mentioned, we've seen a lot of Isaiah Rodgers at outside cornerback. I wonder if it is a case of like you're moving your first round rookie cornerback into a position that's foreign to him and somewhere that he's less comfortable for Isaiah Rodgers, or could that be a future play where you want Keely Ringo in that spot long term? So I mean, again, it's something that I think we're going to have to continue to watch unfold. You're right that Rodgers has gotten the majority of those reps throughout camp so far. He's kind of taking more and more of them in the last week. But I still am intrigued by the Keely Ringo. I think that he has a lot of upside. You got to remember he's younger than Quinyon Mitchell. As weird as that might seem, considering he's got a year of NFL experience under his belt. So yeah, I would agree with your assessment of it. I think Rodgers is definitely in the, like, I guess you could say he's in a better position right now. It's based off the fact that he's getting first team reps, but I think that there's a lot to unfold still with that one. I think even when we've seen Quinyon Mitchell getting outside cornerback reps, he looks good. So I don't know. I think again, there's a lot that we're going to still learn in the coming weeks for that one.
A whole lot of time left. Not a lot, but enough time for some movement and some things to continue to shake out. We did not talk about this position group last week, and I think it's an important one, EJ. Let's talk about the linebackers. We've seen a lot of Zach Bond and Devin White at the top of the depth chart so far, taking the first, reps with the first team defense for the most part throughout training camp. And this past practice on Tuesday, we saw Nakobe Dean actually alongside Devin White with getting the first reps with the starters. Of course, Zach Bond eventually mixed in there alongside Dean. We saw Devin White. He was the first one to come off the field. And Dean had a strong practice on Tuesday. The entire defense really had a dominant practice against the Patriots offense, both the first team and the second team offense. I think Dean particularly flashed on one occasion when he had a pass breakup in the end zone and Zach Bond came up with the interception. But we also saw, it wasn't just the two of them that were really productive. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., he continues to build on his strong training camp and preseason performance to this point. He had an interception over the middle of the field in that practice too. So with these sort of maybe the guys that weren't necessarily at the top to look back at last week, some of these maybe quote unquote depth guys, although I think we would both agree that Nakobe Dean isn't a depth guy and he's certainly a contender. Where do you think the competition is right at this moment? And what are you looking forward to in today's game?
Yeah, I would say that, with Dean, the pass breakup was an important play because he's looked good coming forward a lot during training camp. He's been good as a blitzer, been good against the run, but it's really been, dropping into coverage, going backward, that I think he's had some low moments. And again, the pass breakup was sort of an exception to that rule. So I think plays like that are going to be important for him. I think that Zach Bond and Devin White, if you ask me right now who are going to be the starting linebackers week one, I probably would say those two still. Obviously Dean has had some nice moments. He's kind of like making it more interesting. And then honestly, if you ask me like who's going to be the starting linebacker in week 8, I probably would say Jeremiah Trotter Jr. over Bond. I mean, he's had a really strong summer, and I just feel like he's a type of player that doesn't need a redshirt year, for lack of a better term. I mean, he played a lot of football at Clemson, and if you watch him in training camp, he's the type of player that is often in the right position. He doesn't look like overwhelmed as a rookie. So, I think that he really has a chance to, make a run at some point here into that starting linebacker group. But I think it is also very notable that it's been rotated so heavily. Like some of these other positions, like we're talking about cornerback, like you're starting at right guard, especially, you're starting to see trends pick up. Linebacker, I feel like every couple of practices, Vic Fangio sort of just shuffles the deck. So I think he's still looking for answers at those spots. And if that's the case, I do think that Jeremiah Trotter Jr. could even be more ahead of the schedule I just put him on, the midseason thing. So I think that I think he's definitely in the mix, and like the preseason performance, especially kind of helps that along. So I think that that's probably the position group that I'm most like not sure who's going to be the week one starters. But yeah, I mean, if you ask me right now, I'd say that the experience of Devin White and Zach Bond. Obviously, Bond isn't as experienced as an off-ball linebacker in his career, but still just the playing experience, I think, is going to kind of give him the leg up going into week one.
We'll see if Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is able to continue to propel himself into that conversation. Just a quick update here on the weather. I know I'm not necessarily a weather woman, but I think I have good judgment about these things. So it looks like it is still raining.
So, yeah.
It is still raining. However, it's not raining as nearly as hard as it was just, even 10 minutes ago. And now there are players starting to come out and starting to warm up on the field. Right now, it looks like it's mostly Patriots players out here. However, it also looks like maybe we're getting a couple Eagles coming out too. So we will continue to provide updates if we have any, if there's going to be any sort of weather, implications going into kickoff, which is supposed to be for 7 o'clock. However, right now it looks like things are doing pretty well. Let's talk about one other position group that continues to undergo a bit of a battle. And again, another position group I think that we're starting to see some things solidify, and that's at right guard. And Mekhi Becton continues to take the majority at all of the starting reps with the offensive line there. Tyler Steen continuing, he's back from his ankle injury. He missed a couple days of practice. He's back. And even when he was upgraded to a full participant, he remains with the second team offensive line. Again, EJ, do you feel like this is a lock? This is Mekhi Becton's job, or is there still time for Tyler Steen to overtake him come week 1?
So I alluded earlier to maybe the weather would give us some clues into some depth chart things or some position battles. This is one I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on. Obviously, the weather is maybe lightening up a little bit, but it's still going to be a wet field. And I think if you don't see Mekhi Becton today, with the starting offensive line, then that would probably be a call it type of moment right there. I think that he's really closing in on that. As of all the position battles, I think this is the one that we're probably closest to calling. And I think that, again, like Becton, it's very telling that, even in the joint practice, you don't see any of Steen with the first team. And it's interesting because Steen hasn't had necessarily a bad camp. He's had up and down moments, I would say, but he's had some nice blocks, against the Patriots. He had a play where he pulled across the formation, he leveled a guy, and then he got up to the second level. So he's had some good plays, again, like I said, some nice moments. But I think that the Eagles' intrigue with Becton, it's understandable. If you look at the profile of player that they like at those positions, Becton is like I've said last week, he's an unusual player. He's a big guy who can move quite well at that size, and he's had a quiet camp, I would say. He was quiet against the Ravens, and then it's kind of been the last week. You haven't really written him down in your notebook too much, which again is not a bad thing for a guard. So I think he's really closing in on it. I think there's going to have to be some major shakeup for him to kind of lose it at this point. So yeah, I think if he doesn't play, then we can pull this clip up and say it might be time to call the right guard competition.
I enjoyed hearing from him the other day. He talked about how he compares his brain to like a filing cabinet when he's playing on the offensive line, because he's gone from, tackle now to guard, and he has to pick out a different file every single day. Like, okay, what's it going to be today? That being said, it's consistently been at right guard as of late. And it's got to be a little bit, you kind of have to reorient yourself. And he talks about how his footwork's a little bit different when he's playing guard versus tackle. But I like the metaphor. It was very literary of him. I appreciated that.
If I had to compare my brain to something, it would not be a filing cabinet. It'd probably be like the junk drawer that everybody has in their house that's like filled with a bunch of stuff that you probably should just throw out. That's probably what I would give my brain a comparison to.
I'm sure it's like organized though, right? It's like organized chaos in there.
No. Just utter chaos.
Just normal chaos. All right. Well, EJ, we've talked about so many of the ongoing positional battles in training camp and through these preseason games, but really let's zero in on tonight's game, who you're going to be watching. I mean, we're going to have our eyes. You already talked about Becton, whether or not he's going to even be out there, but given what we know, like the likelihood that the starters aren't going to be getting any playing time, most likely, especially on offense, given what we know, who are you most looking forward to watching in tonight's game?
So I'm going to settle on two. As you know, going into the show, I was sort of on the fence. I wanted to make sure I gave our viewers some value. Didn't want to go with anybody too obvious. So I'll give you a quick synopsis on an offensive guy and a defensive guy. So on offense, I want to see Johnny Wilson. We've written about him having an impressive training camp, being an intriguing, type of prospect, physical profile at the position because of his size and his ability to get in and out of his breaks. He didn't really show a whole lot in the preseason opener against the Ravens. He had one catch for 7 yards. He had a nice block on a bubble screen to Britton Covey as well. I think that's kind of a flash of what he could be. But, these are the types of games that you do want him to be a productive player. When he's a little bit more featured, you want to see what he can do in that type of role. We talked about the wide receiver 3 position and how that is kind of something that's up for grabs. We talked about the mystery man. I think Johnny Wilson has a chance here today to kind of separate himself from the pack that's on the roster. I don't think, he can have 10 catches for, 200 yards and a couple touchdowns, and maybe that would change our evaluation. I don't think that it's necessarily to win the wide receiver 3 job, but I do think that he could be a contributor, and I think these are the moments that you kind of want to see him show what he can do to kind of earn that spot. So that's my offensive one. I'll keep the defensive one a little bit more short. Jaycee Hunt, I was really intrigued by Jaycee Hunt in the season, in the preseason opener. I wrote about him last week, just basically saying, like, he has my attention. I expected him, coming from a small school, being such a recently converted edge rusher, to be completely, raw, just like a player that was mostly physical ability, but didn't really have it together yet. I think the Eagles view him more of a developmental player. But he shows some really nice things against the Ravens, both moving, both as a pass rusher and somebody who is able to drop into coverage. So, I am intrigued at the very least with him, his ability to be a versatile player, in the Eagles front. Vic Fangio values versatility. Having a guy who can drop into coverage with some credibility like he can, I do think that could be a real asset for them at some point during the season. So, maybe he's a little ahead of schedule. Again, there are definitely false positives in the preseason. I think he's got to show it for longer. But yeah, I would say that those are the two. I'd say Jaycee Hunt definitely intrigues me for sure.
I thought it was interesting how Vic Fangio kind of downplayed any correlation between Jaycee Hunt's talent in coverage or just in space, I guess, and also the fact that he was a safety at one point in his career at Cornell. What did you think of what he had to say about that?
Yeah, I was also intrigued by that. I was the one who asked the question, and he sort of said to me, like, yeah, maybe it isn't as much as you're trying to say it is right now, which I appreciate. I appreciate the honesty. I mean, I guess you could probably just boil it down to he's a good athlete, and he's good in space because he's a good athlete. So, yeah, especially like, the level that he was playing safety at really isn't all that applicable to the NFL. So, yeah, again, very fair, and I think it's a good point, but definitely, again, like I said, his ability in coverage, I think, could be a real asset for them.
Well, I look forward to watching those players. I am going to go in a different direction from you, EJ, and this is perhaps a layup, if you will. But my player to watch in today's game, and believe me, you're all going to be watching him because he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot, it is the presumed backup quarterback, Kenny Pickett. Last week, I think his stats were okay. He had 14 completions on 22 attempts for 89 yards, 1 touchdown. He was sacked twice, an 87.1 quarterback rating. He played from the start of the game all the way through the early third quarter. I think perhaps at some point we were like, it's interesting that Tanner McKee hasn't gotten in there, but eventually McKee took over kind of midway through the third quarter once the offense got back on the field. Pickett, I think we're still all waiting to have this like moment of, okay, he is more than capable in this backup role, and we really haven't had that yet in any practice. I'll let you speak to the joint practice on Tuesday. I was watching the defense in that practice, so I didn't get to see Pickett throw. But he just, it's been okay. I know that there's been a lot of speculation too about, okay, well, what, would the Eagles turn to Tanner McKee as their backup potentially? And to me, that seems far-fetched. I also don't think McKee has necessarily done anything to separate himself in this camp in the preseason from Pickett and really prove to be like the better of the two. I feel like last year, comparing him to Marcus Mariota, I don't think Marcus Mariota had a very good preseason. And in some cases, I would say that McKee looked a lot better. But still, the Eagles invested a lot to acquire Kenny Pickett. He is on the hook for 2 more years on a fully guaranteed contract. So they would like for this to work out for them with Kenny Pickett. EJ, I guess what have your impressions been of Pickett so far, and whether or not he's going to be an upgrade over Mariota or even capable if the Eagles' worst nightmare occurred in reality and Jalen Hurts wasn't able to play during the season?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I feel like with Pickett, it looks a little bit like sometimes it looks with the third string quarterback, in the sense that like the offense can sometimes be disjointed, and it's like you don't want to lay it all on the feet of the quarterback just because there's so much disorganization around them. I would say that was pretty descriptive of how I viewed them against the Patriots in the joint practice. The first team offense I definitely think had a little bit more of a productive day. I didn't really see, I was really watching for the wide receiver 3 competition to see what other receivers stood out, and the fact that none of them really did kind of speaks to the day that the second team offense had. So I definitely think he's had like you mentioned, he's been better than Mariota was last year. Mariota had a really rough camp. I think Pickett's been better than that. He's had a couple of throws each practice where, maybe every few practices, I would say that, you would say, oh, that's a really good ball. It's good placement. But yeah, I do think it's telling that Tanner McKee has worked in a little bit more with the twos. I know Kellen Moore said that that's more about getting Tanner McKee, different looks, working with different operations. But I don't know. I agree with you that it's probably far-fetched at this point. They didn't sign didn't trade for Kenny Picket to make him the third-string quarterback and not dress him on game day. But I do think that it hasn't been confidence-inspiring is probably what I would settle on saying. It hasn't been, like you said, it hasn't been like, oh, this guy is the surefire, bona fide number 2 that they can trust in a situation if Jalen Hurts misses time.
We'll see if he is able to separate himself a little bit tonight, maybe give some Eagles fans some confidence and reassurance going into this season. All right, EJ, I think this is pretty mind-blowing to me, but I think perhaps there's a little bit of the sun that we can see in the sky. The sky is a lot less ominous looking right now. What do you think about the weather at this point?
Yeah, so I will own the weatherman label for a few seconds here. It definitely looks like the rain has stopped. I'm not seeing any drops anywhere that you might be able to pick up on it, and maybe you'd call it sunshine. The sky has definitely changed colors from ominous dark to sort of just meh. So I think that's an upgrade. And we have seen some Eagles players actually take the field for warm-ups, which is definitely something that we could not have said 28 minutes ago. So I think we're trending. I don't know. These things can be fickle, but I'd say we're trending in the right direction right now.
All right. Well, that is good news for those of us who would like to see a game tonight. So, assuming all of us, it's also interesting. I'm looking for Jordan Mailata because usually he's like he would tell us how wet the field is, right? Because he's usually walking around barefoot. But
Barefoot.
I don't see him at the present moment. So we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for that. Awesome, EJ. Anything else that we want to inform our viewers of before we wrap things up for today?
No, I think it's going to be a very instructive game. I know the starters don't play, but there's still a lot to take away from these. Definitely not a fan of hyperbole in the preseason because, again, there can be some false positives. But, jobs are still won and lost in these types of games. So definitely a lot to take away.
A lot to take away, and you can continue to follow along with us throughout the rest of the preseason as we share our takeaways and we provide some more analysis on the team as we get closer to that cut down at the end of training camp and the initial 53-man roster starts to come together. You can head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day to continue to chat with us as the game gets started here. Like I said earlier in the show, EJ will be there to comment along with you live from the press box in real time and give you all the information and analysis that your heart desires.
That's right. And before we head out, we should also shout out our colleague Jeff McClain for another new episode of Uncovering the Birds. A new episode dropped today, and he's taking a deep dive into week 3 of Eagles training camp. You can listen to Uncovering the Birds wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to inquirer.com/podcasts.
That is all for today, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to Gameday Central, and we will see you next time.